This controller has magnetic Hall sensing joysticks, and it's advertised heavily to be able to eliminate stick drift for good. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know we're not gonna let that slide. We don't just take people's words for it. We're gonna put this controller through a series of brutal tests to test out if Hall effect magnetic joysticks really are impenetrable to stick drift. Now, before we begin our testing, we're gonna have to get a benchmark. That way we can accurately measure if and how much stick drift we're actually getting in between each test. So to do it, I'm gonna use a website called hardwaretester.com. They have this gamepad section, and we can see right here clearly, we are starting out with no stick drift on the controller currently, so we'll see if that changes over time. Now, if this were a normal potentiometer-based joystick, we would conduct a wear and tear test to see how many joystick rotations it would take to wear down the friction pad on the inside of the joystick, which would inevitably cause stick drift. Researchers discovered that a standard potentiometer-based joystick is built to last through 2 million joystick rotations. Using this math, for example, all we would have to really do is rotate these joysticks 2 million times, and it would wear down the pad enough to cause the stick drift. Now hold on for a minute, because I know what you're thinking. 2 million joystick rotations seems like a huge number that would last forever, so what's the problem? Here's the problem. So one of my favorite games is Warzone, and these same researchers found that the average Warzone player actually does 100 full joystick rotations every minute while playing that game. So using this basic math, that means that the controller would break down and gain stick drift after only 3 to 4 months of usage. Since we've now learned that a friction pad is responsible for the hardware breakdown, we can go ahead and skip over this test with our controller, because a magnetic joystick does not have a friction pad to wear down. Instead, they simply use magnets to detect the movement. For test number 2, we will need to get as much dirt and dust and debris as we can inside our controller. One of the main sources for stick drift that happens over time is dust, food particles, pet fur, or even dead skin that accumulates on the inside of the controller and results in, you guessed it, stick drift. Being that I take really good care of my controllers, and this one is pretty darn clean, we're gonna have to go extreme on this test and take it outside and bury it in dirt. Now that I'm outside, I'm gonna use a combination of a leaf blower and a rake to make sure that we don't only have dust on the outside, but we have dust all the way on the inside of this controller. And if you don't understand just from seeing how dusty this actually was, let me show you something. I can shake this controller just like a salt shaker, and look at all this dirt that's gonna come out. So without doing any cleaning, I'm gonna go ahead and hook it back up to the PC, and we're gonna see if it has drift yet. So as you can see, the joysticks are actually sticking to the sidewalls when I'm trying to conduct this test, and that's because there's so much dirt lodged underneath this. I can't even tell you how nasty and grimy this feels, but amazingly enough, there is no drift caused to the Hall effect sensors because of this test. Okay, so with wear and tear and dirt and dust out of the way, we're gonna have to get really smart if we want to break down these magnetic Hall effect joysticks. So I went to Google and I searched what can possibly break down a magnet, and one thing alone came up, and that is heat. So now we're gonna conduct the heat test and see if we can break down these joysticks once and for all. For our heat test, of course, I started off with the classics. I got out the magnifying glass, tried to go ahead and heat up the controller outside. It just wasn't really effective, so I sat out there in the heat for a long period of time and nothing really happened. So then I went back indoors and I took to the blow drying method, and yet again I found that this just didn't have enough juice. Desperate for answers, I went to the garage, I grabbed my heat gun, and as soon as I started to apply heat, I could already see that it was starting to morph the plastic. I really couldn't even apply heat too long because I noticed that a lot of bubbling was occurring, and it was actually breaking down and melting the joystick itself. So finally, it was time for the moment of truth to plug the controller back into the PC and see if we finally achieved stick drift. It was even harder to turn these joysticks over now, because not only was there a bunch of sand and dirt lodged underneath them, but now we also had morphed and melted plastic parts on the inside. Insanely enough, there was still no stick drift.